Think back to the last time you heard a landline ring. That sharp, jarring trill with no idea who was calling, no name flashing on a screen, just pure mystery. Your heart actually jumped a little, didn't it? If you were born between 1965 and 1980, that sound probably still lives somewhere in your nervous system, filed away next to 100 other sensory memories that an entire younger generation will simply never feel. Not just never experience, never feel, because the feeling itself was built by an environment that no longer exists. Here's what's strange about that. Most people assume memory works like a video camera, recording everything equally so that anyone who lived through an era remembers it the same way. But psychology tells a different story. What we remember isn't determined by what happened, it's determined by what mattered to the developing brain at the time it happened. And that's exactly why this stretch of years, 1965 to 1980, left such a specific fingerprint on the people who grew up inside it. Let's start with something almost nobody talks about: boredom. Real, unstructured, nothing to do, staring at the ceiling boredom. If you grew up in this window, you knew it intimately because there was no device to rescue you from it. And here's the twist psychologists have only recently confirmed. That boredom wasn't wasted time. It was the soil that creative thinking grew in. Studies on idle mental states show that when the brain isn't being fed constant stimulation, it defaults to a kind of internal wandering that actually strengthens problem solving and imagination. So that summer afternoon you spent doing absolutely nothing, it was quietly building cognitive muscle you still use today.
Then there's the phone on the wall, the one with a cord long enough to stretch into the hallway closet for privacy, which was the closest thing to a private message you were ever going to get. Compare that to texting today. Instant, silent, low stakes. Back then, every call carried social risk. You had to say things out loud in real time, with your voice shaking slightly if the person on the other end mattered to you. That's not nostalgia talking, that's basic exposure psychology. Repeated real-time social risk, taken on by kids constantly, builds something researchers call social resilience, the capacity to tolerate the discomfort of direct interaction without flinching. Now picture waiting for a song to come on the radio so you could finally record it onto a cassette, waiting an entire week for the next episode of a show with no possibility of binging, waiting for photos to be developed, not knowing if your eyes were closed in half of them until they came back from the drugstore. This generation was trained, almost like an unintentional behavioral experiment, in something psychologists call delayed gratification. And delayed gratification isn't just an old-fashioned virtue. It's one of the strongest predictors of long-term life outcomes ever studied, going all the way back to the famous marshmallow experiments of the 1960s. You weren't just waiting around, you were unconsciously rehearsing patience as a life skill. Let's talk about freedom, the kind that looks almost reckless by today's standards. Riding your bike across town with zero parental tracking, showing up home only when the streetlights came on. That wasn't just unsupervised fun, it was an entire curriculum in risk assessment and independent decision-making. Developmental psychologists now argue that this kind of free-range childhood directly shaped executive functioning, the brain's ability to plan, adapt, and self-regulate without external monitoring. Funny how something that looked like neglect from the outside was actually scaffolding independence from the inside.
And then there's the silence. Car rides with nothing but a window and your own thoughts. No screen to hand a kid in the back seat. That silence forced something we now undervalue completely: self-soothing. The brain had to learn how to entertain itself, how to sit with discomfort without immediately escaping into stimulation. That's not a small thing. That's basically the foundation of emotional regulation. What's almost poetic here is that none of this was designed on purpose. No parent in 1972 sat down and said, let's build resilience through boredom and risk through unsupervised bike rides. It just happened, because the environment shaped the mind the way water shapes a riverbed, slowly, invisibly, but permanently. And maybe that's the real reason these memories feel so emotionally loaded.
the rotary phone, the mixtape, the bike ride home at dusk. They're not just nostalgic snapshots, they're markers of a psychological apprenticeship most people didn't even know they were enrolled in. Every generation gets shaped by its constraints, and the specific constraints of this era, scarcity of information, scarcity of instant connection, and abundance of unsupervised time, created a kind of resilience that's almost impossible to manufacture intentionally today. So if you're someone who lived through these years, here's a reframe worth sitting with. Those weren't just quirky cultural relics you survived. They were quiet training grounds for patience, independence, and emotional steadiness, traits that turned out to be enormously valuable, even if nobody understood that at the time. You didn't just live through a particular decade, you were unintentionally trained by it. And if any of this stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a little ache of recognition, I'd genuinely love to hear it. Tell me which one hit hardest, the landline, the long wait, the freedom, whatever it was. And if you want more of these deep dives into how our minds were quietly shaped by the worlds we grew up in, stick around. There's a lot more worth uncovering together.